Life over coffee. Conversations for transformation.
While summer is an appreciated and welcome relief from the blistering cold of winter, for those of you who have winters as we do, we have at least a solid 2 weeks where it's below 32 degrees, and that's pretty tough for this old man. Well, it does bring a different difficulty into our lives when things start warming up. The summer months draw attention to our universal struggle with sex and sexuality, temptation, and with modesty, of course. And those modesty debates, they take a prominent role in some of our conversations. Unfortunately, the knee-jerk reaction is to blame our fallen counterparts without careful consideration of what the Bible says regarding universal depravity and every human's temptation to turn what God intended for good into something that will tantalize our lust-filled desires. And so my hope here is not to be casting stones at the female gender, and I trust that the females won't cast at the males as well. This is our universal problem, and I think it would be immature and irresponsible in light of what we know about God's Word. We need to speak sober-mindedly about this, recognizing that there is a log in our own eye. And so there is a balance here, and I trust the tension can be mitigated. The sober-mindedness of the mature believer, it does consider, he and she, the personal responsibility and communal input. These careful Christians understand the sin's complexities and our common blind spots and how they do not discriminate. The truth is, we live in a highly sexualized culture that acts as though it cannot get enough of the provocative. Pornography is, without question, the all-time sexual leader when it comes to capturing the hearts and minds of our global culture. Porn is the most lucrative and largest industry on the internet, and it's the most oft-used marketing approach when selling products to our culture. I mean, in 2 syllables, we understand sex sells. Christians and non-Christians are head over heels in love with the human body. Sex has gripped the hearts of our teenagers. It has infected the minds of too many parents. And whether it's the stay-at-home mom who serial posts her latest hairstyle to her following, or the XXX pornographer, we love ourselves and cannot wait until we can show the world the best side of ourselves. Rarely is there a week that goes by where I'm not dealing with a person, a couple, a family, whose sexually related problems have ripped them apart, and that is no hyperbole whatsoever. For those of you who do the work of biblical counseling, you know that this is true. Sensualness, sexuality, temptation, modesty, immodesty. It's always a part of what we do on a daily basis. No one is free from its temptations or its effects, which is why I hope that as you follow through in this series that I am doing, that you won't fall into the trap of finger pointing, especially toward the other gender. And I do want you to get my book. It's called Sex and Temptation and Modesty. It's a free book at Life Over Coffee. It's our gift to you. You can have as many copies as you want, and of course you can share with your friends. What I'm sharing with you here is actually one chapter from the book. It's the first chapter. And I would encourage you to get this free book. Go to our store. You can download it. And again, you can have as many copies as you wish. But it's just that important. And that's why I produce this content, and I hope that you will benefit from it, share it. But I trust that you'll recognize that we're all collective failures regarding sex and sexuality. And because of that, our humility, that should lead the way as we approach our common curse. Because if we don't approach this subject with humility, I mean, it will have an adverse effect how we process and proceed through all this information that I'm providing for you. Maybe the words of Jesus will be helpful as we think about this emotional and sometimes touchy subject. He said this, and I know you're familiar with it in Matthew 7, verses 3, 4, and 5. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, hey, let me take that speck out of your eye, when there is this log in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. And so I trust that that will level the playing field. We may point at each other, but first we're pointing to ourselves. And it's with that kind of humility that we can launch into a discussion on sex and sexuality and temptation and modesty. As some say that, some men will indeed lust at any female at any time for any reason, just because she is breathing and walking upright. As I have heard some women lament, I could put on a burlap sack over my body and a man would still lust after me. I agree with the despairing statement that many women have made, at least how it applies to some men. But it would be myopic to think that every man is this way, or what a woman wears does not matter. Sometimes in our frustration or our lamentation, we can make these broad scoping, sweeping statements that collects everybody into one category, and there is no sophistication, there's no nuance, there's no discrimination. Every man, no, it's not. And we want to be careful that we don't talk that way in inappropriate hyperbolic communication. You'll hear that about the church so often on social media. The church is awful. Well, no, the church is not awful. The church is absolutely fantastic, and the church is doing what God intends the church to do. Are there people in the church doing bad things? Of course. If I were the devil, he's an angel of light, where would you go? Front and center, the church meeting on Sunday morning, wreak havoc as much as I can. Yeah, of course, we understand that. But sometimes in our frustration, we don't communicate properly and we send the wrong message, and it really doesn't help. And so, no, every church is not bad. Every preacher is not horrible. There are more preachers doing it better than those who are doing it not so great. There's way more churches doing a fantastic job than the few that kind of put a black spot on how we think about things. And then when these women lament that, I could put a burlap sack over my body and a man would still lust after me, I agree with the statement, but not in the sweeping way in which it is communicated sometimes. The problem with sexual temptation is far more complicated than male gender issues. And if our first impulse is similar to Adam's, that woman you gave me, or as a woman might say, all men are just lust-filled, well, then we've lost the plot before we have even begun. Sensuality is a multi-layered problem because porn comprises internal, our hearts, external, the body dynamics. The issue's complexity should be a call for every Christian to dialogue as friends rather than gender competitors. And I trust that we will not be combatants here, that we will think soberly, reasonably, wisely, maybe in a word, biblically. I mean, if a man chooses to lust after a woman, it is his fault, not hers. I'm very clear on that. I don't think I could say it more clearly. It is his choice, and Jesus has strong language for such a person. He should pluck out his eyeballs. Now, that is appropriate hyperbolic language, and Jesus uses it. I think most people know that he doesn't mean that we should, literally take a shiv and dig out our eyeballs. As he goes on in Matthew 5, that we should cut off our hands too if our hands offend. But we know Jesus was using hyperbolic language. But that does not remove the seriousness of the problem. Actually, that heightens it and says, yes, this is a serious problem. Ever since the fall of Adam, there has been two functional realities in our lives. God gave men the desire to notice the opposite sex. Yay, God did that. And being attracted to the beauty of a woman should be a good thing. However, Satan's deception has turned the man into a selfish individual. He now has a hostile adversary, which is lust. And those are the two tensions that we have. God's good creation of love is flipped upside down as it tempts men to twist love into lust. But women have their problems too. When Satan slithered into the Garden of Eden, he did not leave the woman unscathed. Like Adam, she took the Lord's kind gifts and turned them into her version of perversion. God made her attractive. Her beauty draws the attention of a man. And that is a good thing, or it was intended initially as a good thing. And every woman knows it. I think there's hardly a woman who is so ignorant or just oblivious that she's unaware that she can draw the attention of man. You can tell by how Christian women present themselves on their facial pun intended, on their favorite social media platforms. I see this all the time. Quite frankly, it's irritating, it's sad, it's frustrating. When you just scroll, and that's not a habit of mine, by the way, but sometimes, and you see this woman, like, okay, 47 pictures of your face, that's probably enough. Maybe you should go in and purge so you don't appear to be so as narcissistic as that comes across. And women know exactly what they're going to get when they put their new hairstyle or their new face out there. And by the way, it is a new face. It's not their real face. It's never their real face. Facebook and social media is fake. It is a 2D presentation as they put their best foot forward. It's all intentional. They know exactly what they're doing. And they're going to get the responses that their lust-filled hearts crave. Beautiful, you're gorgeous, love your hair. That's absolutely sickening. And it's just wearisome. I just deleted someone from I unfriended someone. I mean, we weren't friends anyway. I don't know who the person is. But every single day, she is showing her face, new hair. And people are talking about her. And some men are talking about her in sinful ways. Explicit sinful ways. The women are talking about her in sinful ways as they feed her lust. But men are more explicit. And so I unfriended her. I'm just tired of seeing it. I don't want to see your face. Do something redemptive for the glory of God. Stop showing you pictures on Facebook. But it was a good thing in the beginning. The Lord did not create her to disgust a man each time he looks at her. She wants him to look at her, to like her, to love her. Satan's deception twisted these good things into bad things, and that's what we have today as these men and women play on social media with a limited social filter and a lack of discretion as they crave those likes. Her desire for someone to love her tempts her to use her appearance to capture the gaze of a man, to feel heart longings in her that only the Lord can satisfy. The inherent Adamic weaknesses in men and women tempt them to take God's good gifts of beauty and sexual attraction and twist them into self-serving agendas. This universal temptation means modesty matters. How you present the beauty of Christ externally to others is just as important as to how you carry the beauty of Christ in your heart. Your external life reveals what is growing in your heart. There is no discontinuity or disconnectedness between how you paint your face, present your latest hairstyle, and what you wear to what is happening in your heart. We communicate this and talk about this regularly within our ministry because it's so important that the fruit in our lives reveal our thoughts. Jesus said, by their fruit you shall know them. You can know their thoughts, their motivations. As you talk to them, you'll learn their motivations and of ultimately how they think about God. You can properly deduce that what is happening in a person's heart will manifest as comparable fruit in their lives. And if lust is in their heart, well, there will be an object of lust in their sight lines. When John talked about these things, though, he was not putting it within a modesty construct as I'm doing here, but in John 3:30, he said, he must increase and I must decrease. And I think we can make an appropriate application of that sentence in our lives as well. I remember a few years ago, Lucia and I were in a small group where a woman, a wife, a mother, she wore many shorts, and I'm talking many, the miniest of shorts that you could, well, probably not possibly wear, but wear. And it had the all caps word pink, P-I-N-K, pink shorts with big all cap letters P-I-N-K written across her bottom. It was impossible for anyone not to look at least once. And it mattered not if it was male, female, child, adult. She was a provocative signpost telling everyone in the room, look at her backside. Her message could not have been clearer. Hey, y'all, look at my bum. I've got these big letters, pink, written across it so you don't miss looking at my bum. I must increase. Jesus must decrease. She reminded me of men who wear hyperbolic belt buckles. No shade on Texas. I love Texas. Texas is awesome. But they wear these hyperbolic belt buckles that draw attention to their crotches. Sadly, this lady was new to our group, and nobody knew her well enough to pull her aside to talk to her about her neon ad wear as she was advertising herself. It was an awkward moment for all of us. But in hindsight, perhaps we should have offended her. We chose not to. And of course, as that story plays out, I don't think there's a disconnectedness here. She ended up divorced. And those things are associated. As I was saying earlier, there is hardly a week that goes by where you're not dealing with individual problems, couple problems, marriage, relational problems, where sex and sexuality, temptation and modesty is part of it. Peter said this in chapter 3 of his first book, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, the wearing of gold, or the putting on of clothing. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. Well, she accomplished her agenda, Pink Lady. Every eye in the place, including the women and the children, got a screenshot of her rear end, something that you just cannot unsee. Rather than drawing attention to the Lord, she was drawing attention to herself. She is just one of a zillion examples of women who dress in such a way, not only to devalue themselves, and I don't know if they're connecting that dot. You look trashy. You are devaluing yourself. But you also take away from the imperishable beauty that the Apostle Peter extolled. She chose to praise herself, unlike John the Baptist, who considered himself a signpost in the wilderness with one mission in life. You have one job to do, and that is it, to point others to Christ. When you see a sign, you read it, you process it, you do what it's telling you to do, and you do not give the sign a second thought. It's not about the sign, it's about the message. We have one job, point people to Jesus. You're going down the road, you see the sign, you're looking for the sign because you want to know the directions. You see the sign, you capture the directions, you have it in your mind's eye, and you move on, never giving a second thought to that sign because you are going to the destination. John said, before he said that he must increase and I must decrease, in verse 28, he says, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him as a signpost. The signpost knows its job. Unfortunately, this lady was a self-absorbed signpost whose primary interest was to redirect the minds of the men in the room from the Christ she professed to her bottom that she was proud of. If a woman dresses in such a way as to draw attention to herself, she is tempting those around her. If the man does sin, it is his fault. but the woman bears culpability. She needs to know how she is a temptress, assuming that she does not know already. And I would say that 99.9999% of the time, they know already. We cannot say this is just one gender's problem. We must be talking about this social contagion while humbly dialoguing about God-centered solutions. It's not suitable for a man to place all the blame on a woman. Can't happen. Shouldn't happen. But it's just as wrong for a woman to make this exclusively a man's problem. A woman's culpability regarding our universal problem with sex, sexuality, temptation, modesty, it's one of the things that's so perplexing about insecure, premeditated women and the internet. A few years ago, and I'm drawing from an old example because most of these illustrations are gone, and I don't want to highlight one that someone would look for, even though I know I run the risk of that with this illustration. But Danica Patrick was a former female NASCAR driver. She believed that she could compete with the men in stock car racing, and she demanded that men respect her. Okay, that's fair enough. You're welcome to compete with the men if you wish. That's an argument for another day. I'm not going to make that argument here. Go for it if that's what you want to do. But it is absolutely disingenuous to expect us to respect you while you provocatively devalue yourself by performing striptease GoDaddy commercials, as she did in the early aughts. Ripping off part of your clothing makes no sense if the message is RESPECT. Of all the people in the world who could do a GoDaddy ad, it had to be a woman who takes her clothes off while women scream at us not to objectify them. It's a contradiction of purpose. Women rightfully lament how they do not want men objectifying them while insisting that we respect them for what they can do. I completely agree on both points. Don't objectify you, we should not. And we want to respect you, absolutely. But Danica presented the perfect illustration of you can't have it both ways dilemma. Danica was a famous example of what many of the women in our church gatherings do each Sunday. I don't want to objectify any woman, but it would be helpful if some of these women cooperated with this good aim. What Danica did was the equivalent of teaching a weight loss class at McDonald's. It's wrong-headed to decry a man's sexual perversions while you're guilty of trying to be sexually appealing. While women can be provocative in their clothing choices, men can be calculatingly secretive about their temptations too. Most men stuck in porn do not give their wives or their friends full access to their world. Wife, if your husband indeed has nothing to hide, which is a gospel-centered person, we have nothing to hide, we have nothing to fear, we have nothing to protect. And if we're truly gospel-centered, Christians, Christocentric, then there's no reason for you not to have complete access to all of his devices. He should be willing to talk to you about his temptations with lust, appropriately, of course, but these are conversations that every husband and wife should be talking about, especially Christians. I'm not suggesting that your husband is a porn addict. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that he was born in Adam like me, like you. It means he came into the world totally depraved. And even if he has been born a second time, I hope he has, he's not free from sin's temptations. You do not have to be addicted to pornography to be affected by sexual sin. The wise and humble couple will seek to have an open dialogue about their temptations because they recognize that these two things are not a newsflash. Thing number one, husbands have been affected by the fall, which means our understanding and practice of sexuality is not entirely pure. Thing two, husbands do struggle to some degree with sexuality or sexually related issues. None of us are entirely pure regarding sex and sexuality. A mature husband will want to talk to his wife about his temptations. A mature wife will want to be part of her husband's sanctification, especially in the area of the most intimate part of their lives. Now, I recognize that many husbands and wives are just not at this mature place, at this point in their marriage. And so there is appropriateness here, there is discretion. You have to be able to steward each other's truth, and so that is a thing that is unique to each couple. But Proverbs 2:11 says this, discretion will watch over you. Understanding will guard you. And with that in mind, I urge you to reflect on how you dress. Whether male or female, it is our Christian duty to point others to Christ, not to ourselves. The desire of our heart should be to give people something to think about rather than something to look at, or how we look, or what we wear. Sometimes it's better to exercise self-control by setting aside our personal preferences for the glory of God. Discretion is a godly trait that will watch over us, as the writer of Proverbs was saying, protecting us from evil. Husbands and wives should pursue honesty and transparency within their marriages. Perhaps your marriage is not at a place where you can handle these kinds of truths, I understand. Possibly due to shaping influences of your past, you're not at the point where you can talk at this level of Christian maturity. But what I do want you to hear is that there are higher levels of maturity within the Christian world than even in our culture. Going back to what I said earlier, we have nothing to fear, nothing to protect, nothing to hide. Our greatest problem in life has been resolved at the cross of Christ, and with our greatest problem taken care of at the cross through the resurrection and the ascension of Christ, we are free. For whom the Son has set free is free indeed. And so we can step into these ever-increasing higher level discussions of Christian maturity, especially about sex and temptation and modesty. And so I would just appeal to you to ask God to give you the grace, and your spouse as well. Find your starting point, wherever that may be. Everybody's starting point will be at a different place. But start talking to each other, even if it's baby steps. It's first grade maybe, that's fine. I'm not judging you for that. I'm imploring you, I'm appealing to you to find that starting point wherever it is. There's no judgment about where the starting point is. There is judgment if you don't get started, wherever you may be, and start having these conversations. You want to give each other the opportunity to care for your souls. The husband wants to be willing to care for his wife, and the wife wants to be willing to care for her husband. Y'all are disciple makers, and the primary people that you disciple are each other. And so ask God to give you the grace, the illumination to be able to see, the empowerment, the courage to be able to persevere in these conversations and start having these talks. It might not be as explicit and as I have been sharing with you here, but you can have these conversations at your own level, in your own way, at your unique starting place. Go to our website at lifeovercoffee.com and get my free book. I just shared with you chapter 1. Now, there are some questions at the end of this chapter. I will not share those with you here, but if you're interested in them, there are 4 questions that you can actually apply this particular chapter from this book. And so I would encourage you to get it and then work through these questions. This book, by the way, would be outstanding for a couple to go through. It would be fabulous if parents got a hold of it as they began to think through, I trust you already are, but how to parent children, especially if they're young. If they're young, then you're ahead of the game. If they are 2 and 3 years of age, you're in a great spot. But if they're not, you'll find information here in this book that will help you, even if you're starting at a spot that's a little farther down the track. And maybe your children are already out of the home, then, well, this is a book for them to read as they begin their journey as adults. And so go to lifeovercoffee.com and get this book. sex, temptation, and modesty. And small group leaders, pastors, I would encourage you. You know it's here, this sex and temptation and modesty. It's not going away. In fact, it's getting worse, and we all know that. And so we want to do as much as we possibly can to fortify ourselves. And so please, I've built this for you, this wonderful resource. It is free. Thank you for those who invest in our ministry. You are the ones that keep it free. By the way, for those of you who are able to invest, Pastor, if your church could invest in our ministry, it would be fantastic. We'll keep producing, and we'll produce even more, but we could use your support as a church or any individual within your church. We are nomadic missionaries. We go around the world every day sharing these resources, but we can only do this because of the kind contributions, the donations from God's body. And so, Pastor, I would just appeal to you to pray. Can you support your local church, support our ministry? We would love for you to do that. We're reaching a lot of people, and we would love to have your help. Sex, temptation, modesty. Get my free book. God bless.
Thanks for joining us. Learn more and get access to other resources at lifeovercoffee.com.